Hi, and welcome to this tutorial where I will go through Tina CMS and how we can create a real-time editor in your website. So I will use Gatsby JS and React to create a simple web app, and then I will integrate that with Tina CMS. So before we get into it, let's just learn a little bit about what Tina CMS does. So it's a real-time editor, which means that you can edit the content of a web page like this one with this tool that Tina CMS provides. And when you save it, you can integrate those changes with your backend, which would likely be a Git repository. So when you save your changes, those changes are reflected on that Git backend. So to show you a real-life example of how that would look like, I would like to present a website, which is the company that I currently work at. So this is gestu.com. And I rewrote this website with Tina CMS and Gatsby. So if we go to the actual website, there's nothing special about it, but as you noticed, we have this little pen at the bottom left corner. So when I click on it, I can choose one of these options like About Us, and I can edit it to maybe About Me, and we can also see the changes in the as we type, so to say. And if I click on Save, what actually happens is that Tina CMS in the background commits my change and pushes it to GitHub, which is where my repository is. So these changes are reflected on the backend, and this is where the power of Tina CMS lies. And in an ideal environment, you would probably use this web app in a cloud environment, which is password protected. So you could use roles or add user roles if you have a team which manages the content editing for your website, so they can edit the website through that environment without having to learn how to code. So if we want to jump into how this works, most likely you would use something like Gatsby with React in order to make this smooth. So what is Gatsby? In order to know how we can use Tina CMS, we would probably have to learn a little bit about Gatsby, just the basics. So Gatsby is a static site generator which you would use in order to create websites using what's called the JAMstack. So these are all new concepts, but I will go through what the concept of JAMstack is. So in order to understand what the JAMstack is, let's start off with what it stands for. So if we go here, we can see that JAM stands for JavaScript, API, and Markup. So JavaScript stands for Dynamic Functionality, and it could be any framework of your choice. As for APIs, it basically means that the server-side operations are abstracted into reusable APIs and accessed over HTTPS with JavaScript. So in short terms, we get our data from API requests. The markup is the actual HTML, which is represented in static files, and they can be generated from source files such as Markdown using a static site generator like Gatsby. And so every website has data, which is the content, and that data in the JAMstack site would be preserved in Markdown files, and the HTML can be generated from those Markdown files. So if we go to the important part about the JAMstack, it's basically the M. So this is the critical piece, the markup, and it means that the HTML or the markup needs to be served statically. So it's basically files that are pre-built. If we compare this with PHP, for instance, then it's not the JAMstack, because you are serving HTML files dynamically from the server whenever the client requests that page. In the JAMstack, the site is already pre-built, so it's just served to the user whenever the user accesses that page. There is nothing being built in runtime. But a static site doesn't have to, or there's nothing being built at runtime, as I said, meaning the time in which the user requests your page. A static site, though, doesn't have to be purely static. So a static site generated by Gatsby can also have dynamic parts to it. So with Gatsby, we can pull in API sources at build time and render the pages out as HTML files. So in order to understand some of the benefits of the JAMstack, let's look at some of its pros. So the first one is the speed. So JAMstack apps are quick and super fast. This is because you are only serving static files from a CDN, so there is nothing being dynamically rendered at runtime. Another benefit is the cost. So JAMstack apps run very cheaply. It's very cheap to serve static assets compared to hosting it on a server which supports PHP and manages a database and so on. Also, the scalability. It's easy to scale a site which is statically hosted. Also, the maintenance, since you can use any provider, any serverless provider basically, like Netlify, it's very easy to maintain a site when the only thing that you're maintaining is your static files, which are the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And lastly, the security. So you don't have any server that you're running or any sensitive data which can be exposed if someone tries to hack your database. So you don't have a database, but you're just serving static files. So let's start off by creating a new Gatsby project, because if you want to integrate TNS CMS, you would probably need an existing Gatsby application. So let's initiate a Gatsby project, and the way we do that is by running a command in the terminal. So here is my folder right here, and what I want to do is I want to git bash here, and that will bring my actual terminal, and I can zoom it in a little bit so you guys can see it. And I want to run Gatsby new my new blog, and I also want to have the Gatsby starter like this. Now we'll paste it right here, so paste, and I will run this, and this will create my folder inside of this folder. So it's basically cloning a Git repository, and which has lots of boilerplate code already set up for us. And as soon as the packages are installed, I want to open up the Visual Studio code and run Gatsby develop inside of Visual Studio code. This might take a while. Now it seems to have been installed. So what you're saying is I should basically run cd change directory to my new blog, and I want to run it in Visual Studio code, and it will open up right here. So I will just bring it in. So this is my new project, and the first thing I want to do is before I start the dev server, I want to show you guys a little bit about the structure of the project. So the first thing that we want to look at obviously would be the package.json file, because that's where all our dependencies are, as well as the scripts that we get from Gatsby that we can run. So we have some cool scripts right here. For now, the most common task that we will run, or the script that we will run the most, is Gatsby develop, and what it does is basically starting the development server. The same goes for start. I think they are quite similar in what they do. Gatsby build is when you want to create a production build. So if you want to deploy it somewhere, you would run Gatsby build, and that will create a public folder or a dist folder for you, and then you can serve that folder somewhere where you deploy the site eventually. but that's not something we will do at this stage. So let's move on to something else. Format is basically a prettier format, so it formats the JavaScript code. Serve is, I think, quite similar to Gatsby Develop because it also opens up a development server. I'm not quite sure about what Gatsby Clean does. Test is if you have unit tests, then you can run npm test and it will, or npm run test, and it will run the unit tests for you. As far as the dependencies go, we don't have many right now. We just have Gatsby, and we have React and React DOM because we're using React. Gatsby uses React. And then we have the repository here, which we can point to our own repository later on. But for now, we can just leave it as it is. I do think that we will have to remove the Git folder if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think we have the Git folder here. We want to remove it because we want to have our own repository, right? Right now, it's basically a cloned repository. So let's just jump into it right now. So what I want to do is, first and foremost, I want to run the Gatsby development server. So I will just open up the actual integrated terminal in Visual Studio Code like this, and I will run Gatsby develop like this. I will run it. And what this will do is that it will open up a server which will run the app on the port 8000, so localhost :8000, as soon as this is finished. So it does take some while, but as soon as it's started, it's quite smooth. So I think this should do it. Yes, now it's successfully built. So I can go to localhost 8000 like this, and we will get a basic hello world. What I want to do now is that I want to have the browser to the right and my Visual Studio code to the left. I think I can close this for now. I can also close this for now. Well, actually, what I want to do is I want to go to the I want to show you guys a little bit more about the structure. So one thing that we have to keep in mind is that all of our development, or all the code that we write, will lie in the source folder. So this is where we write things. This is where we develop the app. The public folder is only things that will be built by Gatsby later on. So it's nothing you have to care about right now. You will have to care about it once you deploy the app, but for now, just stick with the source folder. The node modules is where the npm packages lie. It's a huge folder, and it has lots of dependencies, and yeah, it's nothing you have to care about, but just know that when you run npm install, the packages are added to this folder right here. And this folder is never pushed to Git either. You don't push this folder. You usually ignore it. So in the git ignore, you will have a node modules like this one. So you never add that to the repository. So with that being said, let's try to learn a little bit about how this works, the development environment that we have right now. So we have a folder called pages, and this is where your Gatsby pages will lie. So if you have an index.js, this is basically without anything added to the route. So it's just basically 8000. It has nothing after it. And what's cool about Gatsby is that when you add a new page component like this one, and you name it to something, then Gatsby will handle the routing for you. So if I add a blog.js, then I can navigate to /blog and it will render that component. So it handles all of the routing for you, which is quite neat. So for now, I just want to show you guys that we have hot reloading. So when we add something, I will like add an emoji like this, and I will save it, and we will see the actual emoji pop up right here in the browser. So this is a neat way of developing. We don't have to restart the dev server every time we make a change in a file. We do have to restart the development server if we make a change to the config file, and that is what I will talk about right now. So in Gatsby project, you have a gatsby-config.js file, and what it contains is basically, it has some metadata, usually has some metadata, and it also has some info about the plugins that you use, because Gatsby, even though it has a lot of things built into it, you do have some plugins that you will have to add on top of Gatsby in order to add functionality, basically. And I will get into that. We will see quite in a brief moment. We will see what I mean by that. So for now, let's just talk about the actual concept of GraphQL. If you guys remember, Gatsby usually uses GraphQL in order to fetch data from sources, and usually in a Gatsby site, for instance a Gatsby blog, you would have, let's say, Markdown files, as I mentioned before, basically text files in a certain format, which Gatsby can read if you add a certain plugin, which I will show. So let's start by adding some data, because any app needs some data. Our blog, which is what we will build a blog. It will probably have some metadata about the blog. For instance, what a title and maybe a description about it. So let's just add that in this export object. So I will write it just underneath, maybe I can just write it here at the top. So I will write site metadata like this. This is what Gatsby is expecting. Don't forget the comma, and the title will be a dev blog like that, and the description will be a blog about software development like this, and I will save it. And what's cool about Gatsby is that it already detects a change in the config file, and it says that you would have to restart the develop process if you want this to be applied, basically. So if I click on OK, let's just look at the terminal. We see that it's rebuilt. So this is really awesome. It restarts the development server for you if a config change has been made. So now we want to read this data in our component, which is the index component, which is the home page for our blog. So how do we do that? As I mentioned before, we need to use GraphQL. So as I said before, GraphQL is a language, a query language, which you use in order to read data from a source. Basically, it could be an API, it could be Markdown files. As I said before, it could be data like this. So if you want to read this out, it's possible to do that with GraphQL. In order to understand how we can read this, I will just do a brief change to this file. So first and foremost, if you want to use GraphQL to read the data that we just added, I have to import GraphQL from the Gatsby package. So this is something that is built into Gatsby. So import GraphQL from Gatsby like this. And then at the bottom, I have to add a page query like this. So I will export it, const page query, and assign it to GraphQL with backticks. And here I can write my query. So for those of you who haven't seen how GraphQL queries look like, I will just type it right here. So, and I will go through what it means. So I will name the query to metadata query, and I will have a site, and inside of it I will have site metadata, and inside of that I will have the title and the description. So this might look really weird if you haven't seen it before, but this is how you write GraphQL queries. Right now it doesn't do much, but what GraphQL does in the background is that when the Gatsby project is built, it pre-sends the data from this GraphQL query to the site, so we can, or to the component, so we can reach, or we can use and get the data in our props. So this is something that GraphQL or the Gatsby package provides us with. So it seeds the props object with a data property, which in itself is an object, and I can use what is called the object destructuring in JavaScript. For those of you who don't know what it is, I will just write it right here and go through what it means. So we know that we have two properties in that object. So the object is data.site.site metadata, which is this object which reaches out to this object, and it has these two properties. And since this is an object, we could write, technically you could write data.site.site metadata.title, or you could just write destructure it like this, and you can now basically print it out simply by, I think I want to have the parentheses, since it will be a multi-liner like that, and I want to have an h1 which prints out the title, and an h3 that prints out the description. Now I just want to indent this like that, and now we actually get the title which we added here, as well as the description that we wrote underneath it. So it basically reads from the source. And what we can do as well is, in Gatsby we have access to a tool which is called Graphyql. So I can navigate to that tool by writing Graphyql like that, and this will give us oh, actually this is wrong because it has two underscores before it, yeah, like this. And now we can see this tool in front of us. So right now what we want to do is we would probably have to use what we just added. So we know that the site object has a site metadata object. If I just click on site metadata and I click on description and title and I run this query, we will see that we actually get the data here. So this is a really good tool which we can use in order to design our queries, and then we can just grab that into our actual folder, and we can just, yeah, paste it like that. We don't have to do it right now because we already have it, but yeah, this is a really cool tool that you can use. So this is how the blog looks at the moment. It's not very pretty, but then again, the purpose of this is not to make something really pretty, but just go through the concepts of Gatsby and eventually TNS CMS, which is where we want to get at a later stage. But for now, let's just focus on functionalities and adding features. So one thing that you usually have in blogs is images. So in order to use images in Gatsby, we would probably read the relative pointers to the images through Gatsby. So let's start off by adding a folder in the source folder. So I will name it images, like that. And then I want to bring in an image. So let me just bring that in quickly. It's an Unsplash picture, like that. We'll just rename it to something which is more, just simpler to handle. So code, screen, like that. So this is a simple image. We have to use a plugin right here. Since the Gatsby generator doesn't really know how to read these files natively, so we have to add or extend Gatsby with a plugin which it recognizes. So let's add the plugin with npm. So I will run npm install -- save and then Gatsby source file system, like this. And this might take a brief while. So what we want to do is to add the plugin to the config file. So in the config file, we have this plugins array. I can close the terminal now because we don't need it. So we have the plugins array, and this is where you add the plugins. We need to use a certain syntax when using a plugin. So we open up, I can actually type it manually. So it's an object. So this is a plugin object which wants a property called resolve. And this is where you specify the actual plugin name which you want to use, and then you want to have an options object which takes in a name. And keep in mind that I'm using backticks because they are more dynamic. You can add template literals in it. So we need to have the path, which is the directory name, and then /source/images. So this should do it. So now Gatsby should be able to recognize this folder. And the first thing we have to do is we have to restart the server. So I can do it right here, or I can just open the npm scripts and I can just click on develop. That's a simpler way of doing it. I can close it. Yeah, I'll just keep it up for now. The next step in order to read the image URLs or the image paths is to extend the GraphQL query in the index.js file, basically. So one thing we have to do is we need to extend it. So at the bottom, not the very last line, but before it, I will add the image. So I know what the name of it is. So this is some GraphQL syntax which we need. So we're looking for a file with a name that equals code _screen.jpg, and I will open up the curly braces and add public URL because that is the actual property that we receive. So with that, I can actually add it, because since I'm destructuring, or actually I won't destructure it. We have the data object, so that should do it. We just want to add an image. So you know how images work in HTML. We would probably want to have an alt attribute for accessibility, and then we want to have the source. So I will write that on a separate line, source, and this will point to data.image.public URL. And we also want some styling, because otherwise the actual image will be really big. So I will open up an object inside of the style and add some basic height and width, just to make it, just to control the size of it so it doesn't blow up. And hopefully this will do it. So if I go into my browser, I can actually do it as I did before. I can choose this, and yeah, so now we see the actual image. So this is great. This is a big progress. So this is how you use images, or the basics of it at least. So we can read the actual pointers to the images with GraphQL like this. So now our blog can handle images, which is good. But one thing that we don't have at the moment is what the blog core is about, which is blog posts. So we need to have a smooth way of handling blog posts. And this is where the topic about Markdown arises. So as I mentioned before, the JAMstack, one of the typical ways of using a JAMstack app is by retrieving data through Markdown format. So we have Markdown files somewhere and we read those files in some fashion. So I will show you how that works in Gatsby quite briefly. So let's just go to open up Visual Studio Code, and here in the source folder, we want to add a new folder, which is called blog. So I will add that right now, blog. And we want to add a Markdown file, and it has the extension of MD. So I will name it first post.md. And this is our Markdown file. And what it needs is, first and foremost, I would say that a Markdown blog post file could be divided into two parts. So one of the parts is what's called front matter, and you typically write it in like this. So you have 3 dashes and you write the front matter between the 2 lines, more or less. And here you can specify metadata about the blog. So one thing would be the title, so my first blog post. Another thing would be author, so that's me, YAML. And the date, which is 2020 11/27, and the time is this. I'm not sure if it will handle the time properly, but yeah, we'll see. So now underneath the front matter, we can add the actual content of the blog post. So one thing we would have is the title, and this is just Markdown syntax. When you want to add headers, you can have this or this. So this would correspond to an H1 tag in HTML, and this would be an H2, and this would be an H3, and so on. I will just stick with an H2 and write my blog post, and the actual excerpt would be hello world. If I save it and I go to the right now, one thing we need at the moment is that we have to make sure that Gatsby knows that this folder exists, so that it can read from it. So in a similar way, just like we added this object, I will just duplicate it like that. In Visual Studio Code, it's quite simple to duplicate multiple lines. One thing I have to change is the name property, so it will be blog, and I will actually change it on both lines, so blog like that. And I will save it, and this will rerun the dev server for me. It knows that a change has been made, so it reruns it for me. And actually in the browser, it just says that something has been reloaded and it's restarting the develop server. So now it's completely built, and it actually shows us the page again. Now we need a Markdown processor. So what is a Markdown processor? It's basically I would say software which parses Markdown, and it cuts down on the time spent parsing the Markdown files. So with that being said, I can just close this dev server, and I want to add a new terminal like that, and I will run npm install -- save Gatsby transformer remark. And as I said, remark is a markdown processor. So I will add it. So now the actual install is complete. I can go to the config file right here, and I want to add an entry which will point to the newly added or newly installed plugin. So I hope you guys can see the actual structure of this array. It has two objects right now. Like this is the first one, which uses the file system plugin for the images, and the next one also uses the same plugin but for the blog posts. And the third entry will be the Gatsby transform remark. So I will just open up backticks and write Gatsby transformer remark. And I like to have commas at the end so that you don't miss out on them if you add new entries. So I will save it, and I will rerun or restart the dev server, so Gatsby develop. So now the actual dev server is running. So what we want now is, I can expand this window. We need to add a new page component. So let's open the Explorer again. So right now we have one page, but we need another page for the blog post. So I will copy this file, and so here I copied it, and I want to rename it to blog.js. And here inside of blog.js, we need to do a bunch of changes. So this will be blog for now. We don't want anything at the moment. We just want to remove this. I'll just do some cleanup because we don't want none of this at the moment. We don't want to query at the moment. So right now it's restarted, and we see the blog just as before. So one thing we need to do at the moment, we need to go to the Graphyql tool, which I mentioned before. I will restart this like that. And one new thing that we didn't see before is the all markdown remark. So this is the remark plugin which we added, which enables this for us. So when I click on it, I have an object called actually I can do this. I can remove this because we don't want the metadata description. We don't want none of this, so I'll just remove it. But what's interesting for us at the moment is that we need to look at the nodes object. So if I click on it, here is the actual post. So a node in our case is the actual markdown file. So we have access to the markdown file right here. So we have front matter. So if I click on it, we have the author, the date, and the title. So if I run this query, we actually see the front matter of the post that we added for not so long ago. And what we can also add is the excerpt. So this is the content of the actual blog post. So when I run this, we get the actual text. We can also get it in raw markdown. So it will look something like this, and then you can parse it, and it will keep the actual syntax, like the line breaks and the more or less the way it looks like. You can also have it in HTML format. So you will have an H2, which is just what I said before, that double dash corresponds to an H2 in HTML. So this is quite neat, but I don't think we don't need the raw markdown body, and we don't need HTML. We just want actual data. So this is enough for us. We will handle the HTML by ourselves. So with that said, let me just go to the actual to Visual Studio Code, and before I do that I need to grab this because I want to use this query right now. So at the bottom I will use a new page query, so page query and GraphQL, and open up backticks, and here I will paste the query. So this is how my query looks like, but one thing I want to change here, or actually I have three things I want to change about this. So one of them is that I want to use aliases, so that I don't have to write this, I can write blog, so blog, and I don't want to write nodes because that doesn't say much, because what we're really dealing with is posts, so I will write posts. And one thing about the date is that I want to add a parameter which is from now true, and what this parameter does is that it gives you a relative date, so it actually shows you when something was added. So it might say 5 days ago, 3 days ago, 2 days ago, yesterday, and so on. So it's a much neater way of adding a date to a blog post, and it's built in, so it's nothing we have to worry about. So now we want to do it the same way. We want to fetch, or what GraphQL does for us when the project is built is that it exposes the data in the props. So I can receive it in the data object, and I will destructure the posts by reaching out to data.blog. And now I can just return the actual HTML. So I will have a title, which is my blog posts, and underneath it I will loop through the posts. So I will, since this is JSX, I will write posts.map, and I will map my posts into JSX, which I can return. So I will open up parentheses for a multiliner, and I will write article, since it is an article, and since we're looping through entries, we usually need a key because that is what React wants from us. So post.id, and I do think that we're missing something here because we don't have the ID. So I will add the ID under the excerpt like that, because we do have it in, if we look at the Graphyql, we do have an ID. So if I run this, we will see that it gives us a GUID or a GUID like this. It's a unique identifier, so we can use that as our key. And what we then want is, we want an h2 where we can write the front matter title. So post dot front matter dot title. We want to have the name of the author as well as when it was posted. So post dot front matter dot author, and a comma and a space, and then we want to have the post dot front matter dot date, and underneath it we want to have the excerpt like this, post dot excerpt. Just want to indent this a little bit so it looks good. So if I save this, we'll see what happens. Hopefully it works. I think this is wrong, so this will probably not work. I think it's lowercase. One thing we can do too, just for a small refactoring, is that we can destructure it. So we can write ID, title, date, where I can write. First, I want to destructure two things, which is the front matter and the excerpt from the actual post. And then I want to extract these three things, or actually I want to the title, the date, and the author. The author, I want to extract that from the, or destructure it from the front matter object, and I also need to have the ID from the post. And now I can just get rid of these parts, so I don't need that, and the front matter, I don't need that too. So now it looks much neater, and this should work too, hopefully. This is the beauty of object destructuring, that you don't have to reach out to everything. So now if we go to the actual blog, if we reload this, we see nothing special. But what's interesting is that if we go to the /blog, then we actually see our blog. So we see the first blog, the title of it, we see the author, we see when it was posted, it was in an hour, so it was within an hour, which is really cool because it means that it can read time as I was expecting to. And then we have the content right here. So if I go back here, look at the Markdown file, it's exactly what I was said. If I change this to 20, so it was 2 hours ago, or more than 2 hours ago, it says 1 hour ago, because yeah, I think it counts. I'm not sure if it's actually localized the time, but anyways, this is how you can add a blog post. And what's cool about this is that you don't have to worry about using HTML or write code if you want to add blog posts. All you do is just add a new Markdown file in this format, and it will generate a new blog post for you. And later on, we will look at how we can add URLs for single posts, so you can enter a post. And also later on, when we integrate TNS CMS into this, it becomes even more smoother.